Hey everyone. So I just got back from Washington D.C. today from the Blue trip, and overall the experience was really good. And for my class, I have to record a digital artifact. And originally, when I was thinking about the artifact that we had to do and was planning on going to Washington, D.C., I thought it would be a cool idea to do a blog type thing, but I would post it onto my Snapchat story and then save the Snapchat story. And after going to the first museum that we went to, which was the National Museum for African American History and Culture, or the other way around, I don't exactly remember. But after visiting the museum, I thought it would be a little less meaningful or not as respectful to do it in a blog type format for social media. So instead, I am going to do a reflection video about what I saw and experienced. For the course itself, we went to visit two museums. We went down Wednesday morning, and about 3 o'clock-ish, we went to the Museum for African American History and Culture. And then Thursday, we went to the National Museum for the Holocaust. So I'm gonna start off with the first one. We did some fun stuff too. We had a lot of free time, which was really cool, and overall the trip was great. We also got to see the MLK Memorial, which was part of the course as well, and that was also cool. Which I'll kind of get back to that when I talk about the stuff from the museum for African American history and culture. So, just some thoughts from the first museum that we went to for African Americans. The museum itself was really cool. The group that I was with, we started off on the first floor, kind of just exploring the culture for African Americans. We focused a lot on the music. For me, I focused a lot on the hip-hop culture that they had, being that I grew up as a hip-hop dancer. It's something I fell in love with, and dance, hip-hop specifically, I never really did any other genres, really helped me to get through a lot of difficult times in my life. So just going through the exhibit that they had and learning about like the different stuff that it means, which for the most part was stuff I already knew from doing research about the topic for other classes that I had in high school. But I still learned a lot, and it was kind of a good reflection to think about before going out to the next part, which was about slavery at the time and the segregation that they experienced. So the hip hop culture was all about, excuse me, the identity and community were the two things that stood out for me. And I think those two things are very important to keep in mind as I continue to discuss the experiences that they had for slavery and segregation and just the difficulties that African Americans had to go through. The museum is set up to be kind of like a time capsule type thing. So the first floor starts off with slavery, and then the second floor is about segregation, and then the third floor is about kind of like where our country is now. So the first floor, which was about slavery, it actually started back to the 1400s, which I was kind of shocked by. I didn't know that it started back then. I didn't know it lasted that long, so that was kind of a shock factor for me. I know slavery and segregation especially are something that we've discussed a lot in schools for grade school, and throughout high school as well. not so much in high school, but more grade school for me. And there, I realized that there's a lot in terms of slavery that's not really covered or not really talked about. Um, and going through the exhibit was kind of difficult because I think something that really stood out to me was the fact that like a lot of the people who owned slaves were Christians who didn't really see anything wrong with what they were doing. And it's kind of weird to think about because like that religion really emphasizes human dignity and our worth. So you wouldn't really expect that from them. Um, and
Yes. I don't know.
sorry. The other shock factor for me was how little was actually discussed in schools. Like, yes, we knew slavery existed. Yes, we knew that it was a problem that was going on. But, you know, we never really talked about what they actually went through, the struggles that they faced. The fact that they weren't treated like people, they were literally treated like animals. And that's just a difficult thing for me to think about and to place myself in those shoes. And it's hard to do that. It's hard to think that, you know, people actually did this to others. And I think that part was probably the most difficult part for the time capsule. And that kind of like sadness and disappointment in humanity at the time continued onto the segregation portion of the time capsule. The segregation portion is the topic that I was most familiar with, especially with discussing in grade school. We focused a lot on segregation and the battle between white and black and just the dividedness of whites and blacks and how African Americans were still kind of struggling to get their worth noticed. Just kind of weird to word it that way. I don't really think that's right because they already had worth, but to get people to realize that, white people to realize that, hey, we're people too. So that was also very difficult to go through. And then as I reached the top part of the time capsule, which was about like the current views now, which they're still facing a lot, especially in terms of poverty. I think poverty is a huge thing currently going on right now for them. And just the fact that they have a lot more of a difficult time climbing up the social ladder. But for the slavery and segregation portions of the museum, something I really tried to focus on was putting myself in those shoes, learning more, retaining the information, and kind of thinking about just like what was going on. I was very sad and disappointed in people, and I would say that as I climbed up to the top part of the time capsule, my mood kind of changed. I wasn't extremely hopeful, but I had more hope. And instead of thinking about putting myself in their shoes, I was thinking more about what can I do currently, what issues are currently still going on, what still needs to be done, where exactly do the leaders in social justice come in terms with this topic. And for that was empowering for me. Which was good. So going back to the hip hop culture in terms of identity and community, I think hip hop is really something that helped African Americans to get through the struggles that they faced, especially in terms of identity, because I mean, in order to get through life, it's really important to kind of know who you are, what you stand for. I think that's important for everyone. But when you have people telling you that your identity isn't really worth anything, I think that can be a very challenging thing, especially to keep, powering through life and continue to keep going. And I also think that's where community comes in too, because without the community, they wouldn't have been able to really overcome the difficulties that they faced. I mean, it really took their whole community and even white people to step up and kind of get people to realize what was going on. Um, so I think those two factors for hip hop were extremely important in terms of getting African Americans through the difficult times. And I think they're still important today too. Moving on to the second portion of the trip, we did the Holocaust Museum today, Thursday. And I think this museum was the most difficult for me. It was definitely the one that I had the most knowledge for, but there was still a lot that I was not aware of. It was definitely more impactful for me to go through the Holocaust Museum because of the way I would say that the museum is set up. It really helps you to kind of place yourself in that situation and realize the damage that was done. Not saying that the African American Museum did not do that, because it did, but it was definitely a different setup that caused you to kind of realize more of what was going on. So for the Holocaust Museum, for me the most impactful thing was going through the Remember Daniel's Story portion of the museum. Just to kind of think about like the fact that like children were going through this. It's something I really struggled with in terms of going through the museum. And I don't understand how humanity didn't kind of click these things together. Like, these are children that are being killed because they're Jews. And I'm kind of baffled by the fact that no one stepped up. I mean, I know people eventually stepped up, but it really took a long time for people to kind of realize that something was going on. And I'm kind of just wondering, like, why did no one do that sooner? Maybe it could have prevented less damage from occurring, less lives being taken. So yeah. And continuing going through the actual Holocaust exhibit, which the class got tickets for. The information was very impactful. There were a lot of things that I wasn't aware of. I'm blinking on the name. I think it's the Night of Glass or the something like that. But it was basically where in Germany a bunch of Jews who were store owners, they had Nazis come and kind of shatter the glasses of their stores and houses and stuff like that, and kind of mark them as being Jewish. I didn't know that was an event that took place. So yeah, that museum was very difficult to go through. And I think overall from my experiences going through these two museums, I really think that going forward, it's just really important to keep in mind that every person has human dignity, every person has worth, and we don't have the right to take that away. We don't have the power to take that away. We aren't any different than anyone else. And I think that's something we often kind of forget about, especially as white Americans. We are not better than those who are below us. We shouldn't place ourselves on a pedestal. And I think that's really important to keep in mind, especially being in the program, because we're the ones who are kind of the the ones who don't really have one, or at least struggle to have one. Some people may hear them, but I mean, a good majority of our population still shuts those voices down. And it's kind of up to us to have their voices become louder, more powerful, more aggressive, more heard. And I think at times that can be a very difficult and challenging position to be in, but it's definitely one that's very important to have. And it's important that we do what we're doing in order to progress further and to prevent something like this from occurring again. And we really can't have it, and I don't want to see something like this happen again. It really irritates me that people were viewed as less than others, that people's lives were being taken away for something that was out of their control, such as their skin color or their beliefs. It's just not something that should happen. It's not something that should take place. And we have the job of preventing that.